Welcome to week 17, the final week of the regular season of the 2016 NFL season. It is me, Ricky Sanders, here with Jim McCormick, and we'll be talking quarterbacks in this edition. But before we get there, I want to let you know about this big game promotion we've had going on for a little while at rotocurve.com, but it's not too late to miss out on it. You, of course, can win free tickets plus fan experience events to this event, Big Game 51, which is coming up pretty soon. A 4-night trip to Houston, 2 tickets to the big game, upgraded lower level end zone seats. You get VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celeb game, $800 in airfare credit, all you can eat tailgate, and much, much more. Rotocurve.com/big game. And Jim, we were talking about it before the show that this doesn't look like such a terrible week 17. I mean, we always have fear coming into week 17. I remember last year, everyone on Twitter was freaking out that, this guy might sit, that guy might sit, and it actually made a decent amount of sense. And it feels like this year is going to be somewhat of the same.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some scenarios that are particularly of interest that we need to watch out for. But yeah, it's also, but like you said, it's identifiable at least, right? There's not a ton of mystery as long as you do some research, which we'll help you along with here. You can identify what it's really like. You said earlier we were talking. It's about who to fade. It's about who to kind of to take off your list because there's still a pretty big player pool of guys who aren't really going to be affected by availability.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some teams that we clearly know are going to at least sit guys or sit guys for part of the game, which limits their upside, like the Steelers and Cowboys. But if you don't use those teams and you use some teams with, either something to play for, even if they're out of it, I mean, if you're out of it at this point, why not just use your starters? So I think there is a decent amount of clarity this week. With that being said, who do you like at the quarterback position this week?
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go anti-Ricky here this week, and I actually don't mind paying up at all. I think there's plenty of value at the other positions, particularly at running back, where you can afford to spend up. And I think, tight end has some really good values. Not that we usually don't talk about tight ends, but I just mean you can get guys, sub 4K who are still kind of high-end tight end ones, I think, this week. So, yeah, I mean, I'm paying for Aaron Rodgers in most formats. I know it seems like it's the chalk, but that's okay for me, especially in cash, which is what we start off talking about. It's just, the Lions are giving up 72.9% completion rate to quarterbacks this year. It's the most in league history, and they're going to set it. I mean, unless Rodgers, somehow completes 40% of his passes, and Rodgers has just been obviously amazing. We don't need to go over it too much, but 11 touchdowns. And no interceptions over the last 5 over this winning streak. And here's the other thing, too. The Lions just don't get to the quarterback. They have the lowest pressure rate in the NFL at 19. They create a hit, Harry, or sack on 19.8% of, opposing dropbacks. And Rodgers has the 4th best touchdown rate with a clean pocket. So, it's a nice point total. I think it's the 2nd best point total of the slate, or it's right up there. It's one of the better point totals. On a week with a lot of games in the low 40s, I'm going to approach the games that are in the high 40s and into the 50s. And so it's really Rodgers and Matt Ryan for me are the guys that I really appreciate. I know these are obvious spend-up guys that you usually try to avoid, but I'm into both of them. I mean, the Falcons' offense is historic. I mean, in terms of what it's been doing, it's already passed 2 weeks ago. It passed the team record for points, and they averaged the most points at home. They averaged 60% higher than league average. The Saints are still bad on defense. It's a 56-point total, which is more than a touchdown higher than any other game. Other than that, I mean, I would pay. It's not paying down, but I would also take on Stafford. I know he hasn't been as good with this broken hand or whatever, not broken hand, but with the finger issue that he suffered a couple weeks ago. But still, the Packers are still bad in terms of their secondary. We saw that last week with the Vikings still got to eat. It was just kind of a points fest there, which you didn't expect. But that's kind of how the Packers are going to win. And it's really those 3 quarterbacks. I think I'm completely comfortable paying down for Stafford in that situation. And paying down just means $6,000. It's still a lot, or $8,000 on FanDuel. So I have some tournament guys that are cheaper, but I'm actually spending up in cash. What are you doing? I'm going to guess not doing that.
Well, Stafford's in my price range. That's
Right.
the guy I'm looking at. I mean, you look at this matchup against Green Bay, and his last meeting against them was his best of the season. And this is coming from a quarterback who, over the last 2 years, has had a superior quarterback rating at home. Now, last year it was more substantial than it is this year, but that's notable that he went on the road and, 30 and a half fantasy points, 385 and 3 touchdowns against this Green Bay Packer team. So he's in my price range at 6,000. It's kind of on the upper edge of what I like to do. But that being said, I agree with you this week is that a lot of the upper echelon guys are kind of standing out to me. I mean, even Tom Brady, I think New England's playing to lock up the number 1 seed this week. It's either the 1 or the 2. I know they do have something to play for. I assume it's the 1. At 7,200 on DraftKings, and I'm not sure what his price is on FanDuel, but there's another guy who should come out throwing. I know Miami's been susceptible to the run, so we probably have LeGarrette Blount in play as well. But there are a couple offenses. I mean, New England, Atlanta, New Orleans, Green Bay, maybe even Detroit, who could put up, 35 to 40 points this week. So I think this week's going to come down to picking the quarterback on which one of those teams actually does it. And I think tournament winners are probably going to be which person correctly stacks the right team. I worry about Matt Ryan a little bit in terms of their running backs went for, I believe, 4 touchdowns last time. He only ended up throwing for like 240 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Saints. Now, it was on the road, but that's kind of the Saints defense MO as they get, beaten up by the run these days. And I'm a little worried that they go to finish off drives instead of, a fade to Julio Jones. So Matt Ryan worries me a little bit in cash. I think Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford are probably your 2 safest with, Tom Brady kind of a third that I definitely could see going to. I just think Stafford or Rodgers is where I like in cash. Who do you like in tournaments?
In tournaments, like I said, I'm willing to be a little bit more daring. I'm actually willing to go to Russell Wilson on some shares. I mean, I know it's not completely traditional because he's been disappointing this year, but we kind of have to let that go, right? Especially in DFS, each week is its own market, and the price isn't prohibitive. I mean, it's not cheap either. He's priced up for the matchup. I think he's 6,800 on DraftKings, which is, it's pretty pricey considering what his production pattern's been. But listen, 7 touchdowns last 2 weeks, 16 rushes, which is what I think is interesting. He's starting to run a little bit more. I'm not worried about the Lockett injury. I mean, not for Russell's upside or Wilson's upside, but it's also just since that week 1 game, if we remove that outlier Rams-Niners game, which seems like 2 years ago, since week 2, the Niners have given up the most points per drive in the league. They're right up there with the Saints and the Browns as the worst, defensive teams in the league. And I just think the ceilings here, they have something to play for as well. So there's incentive. All the matchups are there. I like his ceiling. I don't trust his floor, obviously, in cash. I also don't mind Blake Bortles. He played really well last week. I don't know what to say. I mean, you and Josh were really on him in RC Live, and I wasn't really considering him, and I'm not going to lie, I didn't have any exposure to him this last week, and they did well. There's also that new coach concept, which is just mixing up what wasn't working, and they moved Allen Robinson around a lot more than they usually had, and this Colts game, this kind of has a fun fantasy shootout element to it, right? Two fairly bad teams facing off in a final game, and there's really not any threats of resting from what we understand. So I like that, and then I also don't mind Alex Smith. I know it seems crazy, but he's so cheap, 5,000 on DraftKings. You can. It's really on DraftKings that I like him because he's so cheap. I know he doesn't have the greatest ceiling, but he's flashed it a couple times this year. Earlier this year against the Chargers, he did well. I think he had his highest score of the season this year against the Chargers. So yeah, I just think there's incentive to play there with what Kelsey and Tyreek Hill do. He doesn't even need to do much. He can just throw a couple 5-yard outs and it could be a 2-touchdown game for him. So it's really just the price with Smith that allows me to go get big skill players. But those are my tournament plays.
Yeah, I definitely am with you on the Bortles call. I'm going for motivated guys in tournaments. That's kind of my MO this week. I like Jameis Winston against Carolina. They need to win and have a lot of help for them to possibly get in.
It's a 9-team parlay. It's a 400 to 1 odds. But hey, it starts with them winning, right?
Exactly. But at least they know that they need to win in order for any of it to happen. Whether it's a long shot or not, they're gonna have to go ahead and win. And the fact that Doug Martin just left the team for personal reasons. They're going to have to go with Jaquiz Rogers or Sims or one of the less effective guys against Carolina. So I think there's going to be a lot of throwing in this game, especially with Cameron Braid out. I think there's going to be a lot of volume to Mike Evans. And, when Winston finds Evans, that's when he's at his best. So I like him. I also kind of like Kirk Cousins against the Giants. I mean, the Giants looked like a dominant defense for 2 straight weeks. And then on Thursday Night Football, we kind of were surprised, right, that the Eagles came out and made them look like they did. And with Washington needing a win and him looking so good last week, I'm not afraid to go there. And then the only 2 other ones that I kind of like are Andy Dalton. I don't think they're able to get the running game going against Baltimore, so I think he has to throw the ball a ton. I mean, Brandon LaFell kind of looks like the number 1 target there. I know Eiferd's out, so that kind of limits his effectiveness, but he threw the ball 48 times against the Ravens last time. So he only ended up with less than 15 fantasy points, but I think this go around at home, if he's going to throw that much, there is some tournament appeal. And the last one is Landry Jones, just because Cleveland's so bad. I mean, that's literally the only analysis I have for you there. Yeah. I know he's not going to have Antonio Brown or anything, but that Cleveland defense is just awful that I think there is, an outlier scenario where he throws for 250 and 3 touchdowns or something like that, where, at minimum price, 5,000 on DraftKings, you're at least getting value out of him. Do we miss anything at the quarterback position?
No, I think that encompasses the guys who have the it's a good spectrum of guys who have bankability in the cash range, and then just go get creative. It's a good week to be creative. Yeah.
And I think we have to mention Drew Brees too, because he's the other quarterback in that shootout. I know he hasn't been great lately, but when you see a 56-point over/under, and we've kind of predicted a couple games this year would be that ultra shootout that just didn't happen, this certainly has the possibility for that. So, if everyone's kind of tired of predicting that monster game from Drew Brees just because it hasn't happened yet, I mean, week 17 would be a pretty funny time for it to occur.
The lowest scoring game in the Georgia Dome this year was a 54-point game, and that's with the 49ers. That's with the 49ers scoring 14 points. The average, actual total is 61.2 or something ridiculous. So, they've gone. Every game has finished. They've had a game in the 80s, and they've had several games in the mid 60s. So it's not like a variance thing. Every single game, there's points when you play the Georgia Dome.
Yeah. So you want some exposure to that game. I think that's where we'll finalize the quarterbacks. Not necessarily a quarterback, but you definitely want to have some exposure to them in pretty much every tournament lineup, because there's going to be at least someone who goes off, and we'll get to it in running backs and wide receivers. So let's stop before we get ahead of ourselves. And let me remind you about this big game promotion we got going on, rotocurve.com/big game. Of course, you can win free tickets plus the fan experience events to the big game February 2nd through the 6th. All kinds of cool stuff associated with it, including airfare. Again, it's the same prize that the DraftKings $2 million winner won by winning that contest. So you get to live like literally a millionaire when you go to this contest. That's all for us for quarterbacks. Stay tuned, as Jim and I still have running backs and a lot else to talk about.